Something happened on that BET Awards carpet that nobody in this culture is going to let slide, and the more you rewind the footage, the worse it looks for one particular Brooklyn lyricist who thought he could walk into that room with a new woman on his arm and control the narrative from the inside. He could not. He did not. And what you are about to see broken down is not a rumor, it is not a hunch, it is a full-scale public unmasking that happened in real time on a live television broadcast, in front of an audience that has been waiting a very long time to see this exact chapter open up. Claressa Shields did not just show up to that ceremony as a +1. Claressa Shields walked into that arena, took over the carpet, moved through that room like she owned every inch of it, and left Papoose looking like the accessory in his own appearance. And then, as if the universe itself needed to underline the humiliation with a permanent marker, BET, the actual network, the platform hosting the entire ceremony, dropped a caption on their official channels that read like a public roast of the couple, and once that caption went up, the entire tone of the night flipped from award show to autopsy. I need you to understand what I am telling you here. This was not a fan account. This was not a blog. This was the network. And the network took a shot. And it landed. And the reason it landed so hard is because everybody with a functioning pair of eyes had already seen what the network was pointing at before the caption ever went up. Papoose looked shrunk. Papoose looked stiff. Papoose looked like a man whose ex-wife's shadow was longer than the red carpet he was standing on. And by the time the show cut to commercial, the internet had already written the obituary for the image he has been trying to build since the divorce filing hit. When we get to the BET caption breakdown, and I promise you we are getting there, you are going to see exactly why this one moment is going to follow this man for the rest of the year. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe. Let's get into it. Let me set the table properly, because if you are just catching this story from a clip on your For You page, you do not yet understand the weight of what happened at that ceremony, and without the weight, the humiliation does not make sense. So let me walk you all the way back. Papoose, born Shamil Mackey, is a Brooklyn lyricist with a 2-decade catalog, a technical rap style that hip-hop purists have defended for years, and a public identity that was, up until very recently, almost entirely built on one thing, being the loyal husband of Remy Ma. That was the brand. That was the pedestal. That was the platform he was standing on when the culture handed him the benefit of the doubt for the better part of 15 years. And Remy Ma, born Reminisce Smith, is not just his ex-wife. Remy Ma is one of the most respected women's rappers of her generation, a Bronx-born lyricist whose pen has been feared by her peers since the Terror Squad days, a woman who did a bid and came home and rebuilt her entire career from scratch, and a wife who stood by Papoose while he stood by her through everything the industry threw at them. That marriage was not a photo op. That marriage was a public covenant. The culture watched it. The culture rooted for it. The culture pointed to it as proof that black love in hip-hop could survive the machine. And then, in the middle of all of that, the divorce filing dropped, and Papoose walked directly into a public situation with Claressa Shields, a multi-weight world boxing champion, an Olympic gold medalist, and one of the most polarizing personalities in women's sports. Claressa is not a quiet +1 either. Claressa is loud, Claressa is confident, Claressa performs for cameras the way she performs in the ring, with maximum energy, maximum visibility, and zero apology. So when Papoose showed up to that BET Awards ceremony arm in arm with her, he was not just showing up to an award show. He was walking into the single most scrutinized public appearance of his adult life, into a room full of people who had already made up their minds about the story, in front of a network that was about to caption him into oblivion, while his ex-wife's shadow filled every empty seat in the building. The stakes were his image. The stakes were his catalog's cultural standing. The stakes were whether the audience that once called him hip-hop's most loyal husband was ever going to look at him the same way again. And the answer that came back that night, in caption form, in clip form, in comment form, was no. Not anymore. Not after this. So the question the rest of this video is going to answer is simple. How did the network itself end up dragging him on his own big night? And why is the internet acting like it already knew this was coming? Let me walk you through what actually played out on that carpet, because the visible evidence is where this story starts, and it is the layer that anybody with a phone can verify for themselves right now. The first clip that took off across every timeline was the entrance. Multiple angles, multiple reposts, and in every single one of them, Papoose is walking either slightly behind Claressa or directly beside her, and his face is locked in a completely flat expression. Not a smile. Not a scowl. Just flat. Now, some people online argued that this is simply how Papoose looks in public, that he is a serious guy, that he does not do the big red carpet grin, and fair enough, that is a reasonable read. But the counter read, the one the internet ran with, is that a man on the arm of the woman he chose after the biggest personal transition of his career should look, at minimum, engaged. And he did not. He looked like he was fulfilling an obligation. He looked like he was somewhere he did not want to be. And when a still frame of that expression got clipped and captioned, it detonated across every hip-hop timeline on the internet within an hour of the broadcast. That is evidence number one. That is the surface. That is what everybody saw. The second piece of evidence was Claressa herself on the carpet, because while Papoose was walking flat, Claressa was walking like she had already won the entire award show. She was animated, she was moving with rhythm, some of the reposts show her almost dancing through a stretch of the walk, and the contrast between her energy and his energy was so extreme that it looked like two different events were happening in the same frame. Her supporters called it charisma. Her critics called it a performance. But what nobody could argue with was that the visual gap between the two of them was undeniable, and that gap became the entire story. Now here is the third piece, and this is the one that I think really opened the door for the network to swing. There is a clip from the carpet where Claressa is engaging the cameras, doing her thing, playing to the crowd, and Papoose is standing next to her looking like he is waiting for a bus. Every time she moved, he moved with her, but not because he wanted to, because he had to. And that visual, that specific dynamic of one person leading and one person following, is exactly what the Caption BET dropped later that night was pointing at. Which brings us to piece of evidence number 4, and this is where the carpet story becomes a national conversation. BET, the official account, the network itself, posted a caption on the couple that read essentially, "When you are excited to drag your man to the function, and when you move, he moves." That is the caption. That is what the network wrote. That is what went live to millions of followers within minutes of the couple arriving. And listen to me carefully, because this is the part that people are underestimating. When a fan account makes a joke, it is a joke. When a blog makes a joke, it is a headline. When the actual network hosting the ceremony makes the joke, on their official account, about a couple that is standing inside the building they are broadcasting from, that is not a joke anymore. That is an institutional read. That is the platform itself telling you what the platform itself saw. And the platform itself saw exactly what the rest of us saw, a man being dragged through his own appearance by a woman with more juice, more energy, and more command of the room. That caption is the moment this stopped being a fan narrative and became a network narrative. And once it went network, it was over. There was no walking it back. There was no smoothing it out. The receipts were already screenshotting themselves. And oh, do I have more for you? Because if you thought the network caption was the peak of the humiliation, wait until I show you what the actual audience inside the building was doing. Wait until I show you what happened around the award announcement itself. Wait until we get into what the people closest to Papoose have been reportedly saying behind closed doors about the entire arc of this relationship. And wait until I break down what Remy Ma's absence from that ceremony actually communicated to the culture. The stans are really not going to like this next stretch. Because the surface footage was just the appetizer. The real damage was done in the second and third layers of this thing, and that is where the culture actually decides who a person is going to be for the next 12 months. So if you are still with me, buckle in, because we are about to walk through the exact reactions from the exact rooms that matter, the rappers, the boxers, the podcasts, the industry insiders, and I'm going to show you why every single one of them landed on the same read of what happened in that arena. Let us start with the industry reactions, because this is where the cultural evidence begins to build a case that no amount of PR can dismantle. The first piece of cultural evidence came from the podcast circuit within 24 hours of the ceremony. Multiple hip-hop podcasts, the ones with actual reach and actual industry connections, spent full segments dissecting the Papoose appearance, and the read across every single one of them was almost identical. He looked lost. He looked out of his element. He looked like a man who had not fully processed the size of the shift he had made in his personal life, and the cameras caught him mid-processing. That is not one podcast making a wild claim. That is a chorus of hip-hop commentary voices, from different cities, with different fan bases, landing on the exact same read of the exact same footage. When that many independent voices arrive at the same conclusion without coordinating, that is called consensus. And the consensus was that Papoose lost the appearance before the award was even announced. The second piece of cultural evidence came from the women's rap community, and this one hit harder than anything the podcast said, because it came from voices who have shared studios and stages with Remy Ma over the years. Without naming Papoose directly, several established women rappers posted a series of comments and stories in the days following the ceremony that were, at the very least, thematically pointed. Messages about loyalty. Messages about the difference between the man who stands next to you when nobody is watching versus the man who walks a carpet when everybody is. Messages about how the industry keeps making the same mistakes about who deserves the credit for a career and who deserves the exit door. Now, none of these women said his name. They did not have to. The women's rap community is small, the alliances inside it are known, and when several of the most respected voices in that community post the same thematic content in the same window, it is not a coincidence. It is a message. And the message was received. The third piece of cultural evidence, and this one has been circulating in every group chat in hip-hop for the last several days, is the reported reaction from Fat Joe's camp. Now let me be careful with the language here. This remains reported, not confirmed, and I want everybody to hear that qualifier clearly. But according to multiple sources in the New York rap scene, the response from the Terror Squad orbit to the Papoose situation has been anything but neutral. Fat Joe, as you know, is essentially Remy Ma's musical brother, her creative partner, her longtime collaborator on the biggest records of her adult career. And when a man walks away from a woman who is that deeply embedded in a particular musical family, the ripples through that family are not silent. They are loud. And they are being felt in real time inside every studio session, every guest verse conversation, and every collaboration decision Papoose is going to be trying to make for the foreseeable future. The fourth piece of cultural evidence is the Remy Ma record itself. Because in the middle of this entire cycle, Remy Ma has been out here delivering some of the sharpest verses of her recent career. There is a bar on the Summertime record with Fat Joe that has been quoted in every corner of hip-hop Twitter for weeks now, the one where Remy references what she is capable of doing to somebody she does not like, framed against what she was willing to do for somebody she loved. That bar did not name anybody. But every listener with a working memory of the last 12 months heard exactly what she was saying and exactly who the target was. And when a lyricist of Remy Ma's caliber drops a bar of that specificity in the middle of a public transition, that bar becomes part of the historical record. It becomes the caption everyone quotes when they retweet the BET clip. It becomes the soundtrack that plays under every meme. And it becomes the receipt that the culture will use to score this entire situation for years. Now I want to acknowledge the counterargument, because credibility requires it. Some people online have said that reading too much into a bar Remy Ma dropped is unfair, because rappers rap, and every line does not have to be a subliminal. That is a fair point on the surface. But when a rapper of Remy Ma's stature drops that specific bar, in that specific window, with that specific framing, and every single fan in her orbit hears the same target, that is not projection. That is pattern recognition. And pattern recognition is how the culture keeps score. The fifth cultural signal is the silence from Papoose'S own camp. And this one is telling in a way that is hard to overstate. In the days following the ceremony, as the caption from BET was going viral, as the clips were being reposted, as the podcasts were dissecting his appearance frame by frame, the response from Papoose himself was essentially nothing. No statement. No clapback. No freestyle addressing it. Nothing. Now, some people would argue that silence is dignified. Others would argue that silence is a strategic loss. My read is that silence in this specific moment communicates something very particular. It communicates that Papoose does not have a counter-narrative to offer. Because if he did, he would have offered it. He is a lyricist. His entire brand is built on being able to respond in bars. And the fact that no bars have arrived tells you exactly where he is sitting right now. Which is on the floor, wondering how a caption from a network became the entire story of his weekend. And now the culture is watching to see if he can find a way to write his way out of it. My honest opinion, he cannot. Not because he lacks the technical skill, but because the story is bigger than any single verse can address at this point. And that leads us directly into the next layer, because the story is bigger for a very specific reason, and that reason lives in a place most of the hip-hop audience does not usually think to look. Now let me pivot completely, because everything I just walked you through, the caption, the carpet, the reactions, the record, that is the entertainment layer. That is the surface of the surface. And if we stopped here, we would be doing the same shallow dissection that every clip account on the internet is already doing. But this channel does not stop at the entertainment layer. This channel goes into the business layer, the industry layer, the systems that actually determine whose career survives a moment like this and whose does not. And once you understand the business layer of the Papoose situation, you're going to realize that the BET caption was not just a public humiliation, it was a leading indicator of a much larger institutional shift that is already happening around this man and that he does not yet fully understand. Let me walk you through the three systemic angles that connect this weekend to the actual future of his career. The first systemic angle is publishing and legacy revenue. Papoose, over the course of his 2-decade career, built a catalog that lives largely in the mixtape and independent release space. That is a very specific kind of catalog. It generates income differently than a major label catalog. It depends heavily on brand alignment, feature opportunities, and continued cultural relevance to keep monetizing. Papoose is not a man who is going to live off the passive royalties of a decade-old platinum record. That is not the shape of his business. His business depends on continuing to be someone the culture wants to work with, someone the culture wants to platform, someone the culture wants to book. And every institutional signal, from a caption to a booking decision to a feature invite, either strengthens that position or weakens it. The BET caption weakened it. Not by a small margin. By a significant one. Because when the network that owns the biggest urban entertainment platform in America publicly frames you as the arm candy in your own appearance, every booker at every event for the next 12 months is going to hesitate before putting you in a similar spotlight. That is how these things actually work behind the scenes. Bookings are not decided by talent alone. They are decided by narrative fit. And Papoose'S narrative fit just took a public hit from the network itself. The second systemic angle is the women's rap alliance structure. This is a piece of the industry that a lot of casual fans do not understand, but it is critical to the future of Papoose'S career, because women's rap in this era is not a fragmented scene. It is a network community with tight alliances, shared managers, overlapping producers, and mutually protective relationships. Remy Ma has been an anchor node in that network for over a decade. She has features with, co-signs from, and studio relationships with a significant percentage of the biggest women in rap right now. And when a network as tight as that one experiences a shockwave like a divorce filing followed by a public appearance like the BET Awards, that network responds. Quietly. Efficiently. Institutionally. Papoose'S ability to place features with the biggest women rappers of this era just became structurally harder. Not because anybody is going to say it out loud. Because nobody has to. The third systemic angle, and this is the one I think most people are missing entirely, is the podcast and long-form media ecosystem. Because we are living in an era where a rapper's public reputation is no longer built by radio interviews and magazine covers. It is built by podcast appearances, long-form sit-downs, and the willingness of the biggest independent hip-hop platforms to give an artist a chair and a microphone. And every single one of those platforms is watching the BET moment right now. They are all deciding, in real time, whether Papoose is a booking that helps their episode go viral or a booking that comes with too much narrative baggage to be worth the trouble. Now, on the surface, that sounds like it might help him. Controversy drives clicks, right? Sometimes. But not this kind of controversy. This is not the beef controversy that makes a podcast episode go viral. This is the perceived loyalty controversy that makes a podcast episode a referendum on the guest's character. And most major platforms in the hip-hop podcast ecosystem do not want to host a character referendum on their air. They want the guest who brings energy, bars, and stories. Papoose, at this exact moment, brings a caption from BET and a series of questions he does not have answers to. That is not a booking. That is a liability. And what makes all three of these systemic angles converge into a single conclusion is this: every one of them is a compounding effect. It is not that he loses one feature. It is that he loses the feature that would have led to the next feature that would have led to the tour date that would have led to the brand partnership that would have led to the ongoing cultural relevance that keeps a catalog like his monetizable. When you lose a single node in a network like this, you do not lose the node. You lose every future node that node would have connected to. And that is why the BET caption is not just a public embarrassment. It is a business event. A quiet, structural, career-shaping business event that just happened in real time on live television. Which brings us to the truth bomb that this entire video has been building toward, and I want you to sit with this one, because it is the actual center of gravity of everything I just walked through. Here is what I think happened, and I am going to lay it out with the maximum conviction I have. Papoose did not walk into that BET Award ceremony as a boyfriend supporting his partner on a big night. Papoose walked into that ceremony as a man who understood, on some level, that his cultural standing was being tested in front of the largest audience he was going to face all year, and he chose to attend anyway because he believed the appearance would strengthen his position. It did the opposite. It shattered it. And here is the part that hurts. The reason it shattered his position is not because Claressa Shields did anything wrong. Claressa showed up as Claressa. She was loud, she was expressive, she owned the carpet, and she performed for the cameras exactly the way she performs for the cameras every other day of her life. The reason the appearance shattered his position is because he did not have a version of himself that could stand next to her energy without disappearing into it. And that, right there, is the reveal. Papoose spent 15 years building a public identity that was defined by his relationship to Remy Ma. Every interview, every appearance, every red carpet, every feature, the frame around him was Remy Ma's husband. And when that frame came off, he did not have another one ready. He walked onto that BET carpet without a public identity of his own that could stand up to the woman he was standing next to. And Claressa, being Claressa, filled the empty space around him instantly. She did not push him out of the frame. He never claimed the frame to begin with. That is why the network's caption landed the way it did, because the network was reading, in real time, exactly what every viewer at home was reading. That the man on the arm of the champion did not have an identity of his own strong enough to share the shot. And when a caption from BET can articulate that in one sentence, and every fan in America can confirm it from one clip, and every women's rapper in the culture can respond to it with a bar, and every industry booker can quietly factor it into future decisions, that is not a moment. That is a public reclassification. Papoose, in the span of one weekend, went from being the husband the culture rooted for to the boyfriend the network laughed at. And once a network laughs at you on your own night, the culture files that laughter in a place it does not forget. Now let me be clear about what I am not saying. I am not saying his career is over. I am not saying he cannot rebuild. I am not saying there is no path forward. What I am saying is that the path forward is going to require him to build a public identity that is completely independent of both Remy Ma and Claressa Shields, and he is going to have to do it in front of a culture that just watched him fail to stand on his own for one single red carpet. That is the mountain. That is what the BET Caption actually put on his shoulders. And whether he has the will and the wisdom to climb it is the real question that this weekend just handed to him. And here is why the right person is still winning through all of this, because I do not want to leave you thinking this story is only about a man on a carpet. This story is also about the woman who was not on the carpet, and the way she has been carrying herself through the entire situation is a masterclass in how to survive a public reset with your dignity, your career, and your cultural position fully intact. Remy Ma did not show up to that BET award ceremony. She did not need to. She did not post a subliminal on her Instagram story in the middle of the broadcast. She did not go on a podcast the next morning to give her side. She did not do the emotional interview cycle. She did exactly what a lyricist of her caliber knows to do when the narrative is trying to pull her into a spectacle she did not choose. She stayed on the mic. She kept writing. She kept releasing. She kept collaborating. And in doing so, she made her absence louder than his presence. That is not luck. That is craft. That is the discipline of an artist who has been through enough public storms to know that the loudest response is often the one you do not give. And here is the contrast one-liner that crystallizes this entire story. One person spent the weekend being captioned by the network that used to hand him trophies. The other person spent the weekend being quoted in every group chat that used to root for the marriage. That is the scoreboard. That is where things stand. And if you have been following Remy Ma's career the way I have been following it, you already know that this is exactly the position she has been in before. Underestimated, written off, treated like a supporting character in her own story, and every single time, she has come back sharper, more precise, and more culturally central than the people who tried to write her out. That pattern is not going to break here. Because everything about the way she has handled this moment tells you she is not playing to win the weekend. She is playing to win the year. And the year has not even started yet. Meanwhile, the culture is watching. And the culture, whatever it says on the timelines, has already made up its mind about who came out of this weekend with their standing raised and who came out of it with their standing shrunk. The rappers know. The producers know. The bookers know. The podcasters know. And when the industry knows, the moves start to shift accordingly, quietly, structurally, in ways that do not show up in a Twitter reply but do show up in a feature credit, a booking slot, a cosign that arrives or a cosign that does not. That is where the real winning happens. That is where the real losing happens. And in that arena, the arena that actually matters, Remy Ma is exactly where she wants to be. Papoose'S, unfortunately for him, is exactly where the network put him. And this is only the start. Because the next chapter of the story is already being written in rooms none of us have access to yet, and there are at least 2 specific developments coming that you are going to want to be locked in for. The first is Remy Ma's next release cycle. There has been chatter in the industry about a run of new material coming that is going to sit squarely inside the emotional and narrative window this entire situation has opened up, and if the bars we have already heard are any indication, the next set of records is going to be historical. Not just in terms of technical craft, but in terms of the cultural weight they are going to carry. When those records drop, we are going to break down every bar, every reference, every subliminal, and every historical callback in real time. You do not want to miss that. The second development is the response from the Papoose'S camp itself. Because at some point, and it is going to be sooner than later, this man is going to have to say something. Whether it is a verse, a statement, a podcast appearance, or a full sit-down interview, the silence cannot hold forever, and the moment he speaks, the entire narrative is going to move again. And when it moves, this channel is going to be here to break it down piece by piece. The only way to make sure you do not miss any of it is to make sure you are subscribed right now, notifications on, so the second either of those chapters opens, you are in the room with us as it happens. Now, if you want to understand the deeper history of how this exact kind of moment has played out in hip-hop before, and why the pattern almost always ends the same way for the artist who walked away from the partnership the culture rooted for, the next video you need to watch is the one where we break down the exact business mechanics behind why long hip-hop marriages that end in public almost always cost the leaving partner more than they think they are going to lose, not in dollars, in cultural capital. There is a specific pattern, there is a specific timeline, there is a specific set of industry moves that get triggered every single time, and once you see the pattern, you are never going to look at these situations the same way again. That video is going to answer the question that this one just raised. Click it next. Stay locked in. And remember, the culture is always watching, the network is always deciding, and the right person is always, eventually, the one still standing. Peace.